All right, so here we are again. I'm doing the next video. I watched the other one, part of it, and I gotta say it's not that bad. 20 minutes learning all these terms, and you know, like I said, if you've got a really high score on it and you just wanted to listen to it and have it on when you're cleaning your room or have it minimized and you could be like doing some other stuff. I know you guys are really good at multitasking, so even though it was 20 minutes, and I did get feedback from some of you that, you know, if you watch videos at home, it takes a long time. I mean, if you have 5 classes and they all have 20 minutes, that's a lot of time. So I won't be doing it all the time. You can watch it over a couple of days. And another feedback I got is that you wanted to have whatever you watch at home connect directly to what it is we're doing in class and not just have it like 2 separate random things. So I think what I'm doing is actually valuable. I'd like to think so. So that way, instead of me doing this to all of my classes for 20 minutes, you're still getting the material. I'm still teaching it to you. I'm still telling it to you, but it's not in class. You can do it whenever you feel like it. You could do it in the morning. You could listen to it while you're getting ready for school. And like I said, as long as you get it done in, you know, a couple of days' time, show that you did it. And what's cool about it too is you can pause it and go back and listen to it again. You can go online. If I'm explaining it and you're still a little unclear, look it up. Just make sure you have a reputable site. So this might actually work really well. And I want your feedback. I mean, I respect your opinion in class, so tell me what you think of these. And like I said, hopefully it'll, as I learn all the bells and whistles of screencasting, they'll be better. But for now, you know what, it's just me talking about what I know a lot about. So, all right, so plot. I really love talking about plot. I could talk about it for a long time, but I want to try to boil it down to the essential stuff. So I was talking about story versus plot in the other video. The story is the general summary of what happens. So think of someone who saw a movie that you wanted to see, you didn't see it, and you're like, oh man, I missed it. Well, what was the story with it? Oh, well, the story was really good. It was about this guy, and there was this building, and he was trying to prevent it from falling down, and then this happened, and that's basically the story. Plot is way more specific. Plot is not just what happens, but how it's being told. And you have a lot of different ways to do plot. But what I was looking for, or hoping that you put in that square on the diagnostic, is this one thing. You either kind of got it or you didn't. You either had a question mark or you put something. And a lot of people put this thing. Most people did that. Some people call it a plot mountain, or I've heard it called a witch's hat because it looks like a witch, right? Isn't she cute? We're going to kick it up a notch. I don't like that one. Not that there's anything wrong with it specifically, but what I want you to think of it is a person's story. It's like a person's plot. It's a little piece of their life that's taken out, and it starts down here. That's their life. All right, then something happens and it goes up. So the tension builds and it gets higher and higher until it can't get any more intense or meaningful. Something happens and it goes down like that, and then it lands there. So now look at the difference. This is higher. So if you think of their life and they're starting out and then there's a problem, and from that problem it just goes uphill and they're struggling and then it goes one way or another, it falls, which we'll talk about that term in a little bit. but then it ends up higher than where they started, usually. If you have a happy ending, this is their life, and they grow, and their character changes over time. There's some character growth. So think about it that way, as this is an actual representation of one little part of their life. Given that, let's go over the terms. I like to think of it as 7 major terms of plot. So most people, I saw everyone loves this one right here, climax. People love that one because it's the most exciting one. I want you to think of a climax as the point that determines the rest of their life. In a romance, either he gets the girl or he doesn't, or it'll happen in, like, I can't tell you how many movies I've seen where, you know, one of them is going to the airport and getting on the plane, and the other one runs, and they get the person off of the plane just in time, and that's the climax, because now you know, yay, they're going to be together forever. Or in an action movie, the time clock is clicking down, and they have to detonate a bomb in time because it'll either explode or it won't. And there's the black wire and the red wire, and do they cut the right one? And they do it, and you'll look at the clock, and it's like 000.001, and right at that moment. So that's why it's the climax, because everyone dies and blows up, or they save the day. So most people got that one. A lot of people get this one because it looks the way it seems. It's rising up to the climax. So this is rising action. We'll just call it RA. Well, if this is rising, and you're going from left to right, because you read from left to right, so if this is rising, then this one is falling action. Falling action is the hardest one for me to kind of pinpoint, because sometimes there's not much of a falling action. You have a climax, and then you just see how it ends up. So I don't really focus on falling action so much. When we get to Shakespeare, sometimes he has an entire act that is the falling action. Falling action is the results from the climax, and then you have life going on, which then the conflict is completely resolved. So we'll put that one. The resolution. And in the last video, I told you, like, think of re-solution. There was the solution to a problem. And if you re-solve something, that means that there was probably problems in their life before this particular story. And it implies that there's probably going to be solutions that they'll need to come up with for future problems. So I kind of like to feel inspired when I have my own conflicts in life. What am I supposed to learn for them? How am I supposed to grow? So, you know, think about that. When you have a conflict in your life, the silver lining to that is the bigger the problem you have, the bigger potential for growth. Itty bitty problems, you know, I want that shirt. My parents won't let me get that shirt. You know, how much are you going to grow from actually resolving the conflict over wanting that $80 shirt at the mall? But if you have a big problem in your life, there's potential for growth. And I get inspired by that. And, you know, you think of some people who make it big in the world, and they came from really hard times. You know, they had a huge solution to a problem. You can learn from that. That's the character growth. Which actually gets me to this one here. You see the difference between this line and that line? Right here, this difference. I call that the 7th element of plot, and a lot of people don't put that in there. That's why I like to teach it this way. This is the character growth. We'll just call it CG, character growth. Now you may say, well, what if, like, everybody dies in the end? Or what if they don't get what they want and people are actually worse off? All right, well then, how would you draw the plot? Like that, right? So you can actually make the plot line look like the way the story actually plays out. And once I give you all the terms here, then we can play around with that. I'll show you the difference. All right, so we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I said there were 7, right? So we've got 2 more. Well, the one that some of you got wrong on the assessment is right here. This is the exposition. Look. Expo. That's right here. The exposition, think of expose. You are exposing the reader to a lot of information, like the characters and the setting. And what's the setting? It's the position of where they are in time and space, right? So the setting may be Chicago in the 1950s, and the characters are a bunch of kids in an inner city school. So that's the exposition. And specifically, like, what's the story, the backstory of a certain person going into the book. So I do this too. I like to think of the exposition. I draw a dotted line right here. All right. I'm the only person who I think teaches it this way, and it's a little kind of confusing at first, but if you think about it, then you'll be like, oh, that totally makes sense. So I like to think of this right here as page 1 of a novel. So if I'm reading a book, let me have a visual here. All right, so I got this big book, and I'm here, and I'm at page 1, and I find out that where does it take place? It takes place in Chicago in 1950, and there are all these kids in inner city school, and that's the beginning of the action. It's in 1955, and there are all these people in here, and it's in Chicago, and you learn about the one character, and you don't understand why this character is so angry and upset, and it's page 1 in Chicago in 1955. Well, what you learn then, let's say the author decides to create this backstory before that first page in 1955 in Chicago. And this one character back in 1950 was actually living in Texas. That was like 5 years ago in a different spot before that first page. That's also exposition. So that's why I say it's like before page 1, because it's before the actual action of the story. And you can have that exposition. I think I said this in the last video. You can have exposition. A lot of times it's in the beginning, because you need that. Otherwise, you're like completely confused. Who are these people? Where are they? I don't get it. I'm confused. But you can also sprinkle it throughout the story. So halfway through the story, you're like, why is this person so upset? And then you realize, oh, 5 years ago, they were living somewhere else, and now they resent their family for pulling them out of Texas, and that's why they're miserable in Chicago. And you say, okay, it adds a layer of meaning to the story. So there's a fine line an author will do on how much exposition to give in the beginning. You don't want to give so much, because it goes on and on and on, and no action happens yet. But then again, if you don't give enough, you might not make it past the first chapter or 2, because you say, I'm like completely lost, and you just give up. So you got to give enough not to confuse the reader, but you don't want to give so much where you bore the reader, and you got to hit that little sweet spot. Then the final one is, which you guys will not know, I don't think, right here. This is a specific moment. This is a specific moment. This is called the inciting incident. Where can you see it? Where should I put it? I-N-C-I-T-I-N-G. Inciting. That looks like an H. An inciting incident. All right, so it's easy to remember. I-N-C-I-T-I-N-G and I-N-C-I-D-E-N-T. So they're both the same, inciting incident. And when you think of an incident report, if you get into a car accident, you have to fill out this, because it's, okay, ma'am, please describe what happens. So It's what happens right there. And inciting kind of sounds like exciting. So think of it this way. It is the moment that the conflict gets introduced, because conflict makes a story interesting and you have to have one, and it's that particular moment. Sometimes they're really obvious. In a short story, like a couple of pages, the author doesn't have much time with words and page space to do it. So it'll be, but what Bobby didn't know was, or they'll say, when all of a sudden, or from out of the blue, this thing happens. Bam! Now we've got the problem. And it can be really, really obvious. So this is a particular moment that it gets solved one way or another. And this is when it first starts out. These two are directly linked to one another. And if you have a good author, there will be some foreshadow, some little clue in the beginning, right around here, how it's going to do it right here, if they are employing a lot of those conventions. So I'm looking at the time, and it's 16 minutes. I have about 4 minutes because I said I'd keep it to 20. I'm pretty pleased with the timing of this. So let me just show you a couple of different variations of those plots. Hopefully you wrote all that stuff down. And if you didn't, you can just rewind it. See, that's the beauty of all this stuff. I love that. I think I'm going to like this. All right. So standard plot, bump, 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 right? And then we want to add a couple little fancy things. The difference between these two, right here, you want to note. And you want to do before page 1, right there. And you want to circle the specific moments of the introduction of the conflict and how the conflict goes one way or another. Kind of like rolling a pebble down a hill, and if it goes this way versus this way, right here. And then you've got how it gets solved, right? You should know all of those things. So why don't you pause the video, see if you know them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You paused it. Okay. So here they are. Let me start over. They are exposition, inciting incident, rising action, character growth, nap, tricked you, climax, falling action, resolution, and then the character growth. Different combinations will have a different look and a different feel. So that's the standard one. Now let's say you have one of those stories where not much really happens, but it's about the characters and how they interact with one another, and the beautiful language, and oh, you know, it's not just about the dog, it's what the dog symbolizes, or all the different finer points of dialogue and how they react. But what really happens? Two people sitting on a boat talking about their lives together. Not much happens, but all that stuff and what it means. Think like, not to stereotype, but like a chick flick, right? One of those Nicholas Sparks movies, books. Lots of backstory. Oh, you know, how they were when they first met, when they were kids, and they would play in the summers and go horseback riding and, you know, drink lemonade, and the parents, and go away on vacations together, all this stuff. And maybe you would learn about all this stuff in a flashback right along here. But what actually happened? They were sitting on a boat remembering all this stuff, and that's really what it is. Now, some people would love that type of stuff, and other people would say, it's so stupid, nothing happened, it's just like people sitting on a boat, right? And what's the climax? Whether or not to keep on sailing or to go back to the shore, and what that means. And do you get it? They kept on sailing. They kept on sailing. It's all about the sailing. And maybe if they were horseback riding, as they're sailing off into the sunset, you see like some horses in the background, like all that stuff. But it's just two people on a boat. All right, well, look at the opposite one. you could have like something like this. Not much exposition. Good guy, bad guy. The guy with the leather jacket and the other guy with the motorcycle. And you may not even remember their names, but you know it's Vin Diesel and The Rock or something like that. So typically this is those like major adrenaline, testosterone filled movies, and with like lots of guns and smoke and really loud soundtrack. And then bam, look at that rising action. Lots of rising action. It's actually small right here because I didn't have much room, but let's erase the Nicholas Sparks novel. And bam, look at that. So it's like good guy, bad guy, all this stuff happens, and then they save the day. Okay, so look at that. The entire world was threatened, and okay, now the world can go on. Or let's say it's one of those things like a zombie movie or a horror movie. You know, kids in a park, or kids in a school at the prom, right? And then all these things happen, and the movie's not over until everyone's dead because it's a horror movie. Bam. And sometimes what'll happen is man, you have the climax, and then before you know it, the credits are done. It's over. Boom. So like sometimes you'll see the monster and it's like, and it's just dark, and then the credits roll, and you're watching it and you're like, seriously, that's the end? There's no resolution? Yeah, there's a resolution. It's called everybody's dead, right? So there's no falling action. There's no letting the dust settle between killing the last person and then the movie's over. You don't need it. Or sometimes you don't even see the ending. They allow you to fill it in yourself. So a lot of times what happens is if you have a great book, it's a great book because of the language and all the way the writer takes the time to describe stuff. So that type of book doesn't necessarily make a very good movie because it would be a boring movie. Same thing. This type of movie with all of that action and the bullets and the guns and the shootouts and stuff, sometimes that would be really tedious and difficult to read like 5 pages. And the more visual a movie is, the more difficult that would be for a writer to actually show it on the page. Same thing too, if in other ways too, what if it might take a couple of pages to describe how this woman looks, or what the beautiful mansion looks like. And in some ways that's really nice to read because you can imagine this beautiful setting in Italy, and you can fill it in. But if you make a movie out of it, it's over like that. So it's really rare where it's a great book and a great movie unless they make changes from the book to the movie. And a lot of people will complain, you know, I read the book and then I saw the movie and it was nothing like it. That's because they're 2 different mediums. You can't do it usually unless the person is specifically writing the novel knowing it's going to wind up being a screenplay and it's going to be a movie. Then they'll have to like kind of, if they really want the book to be a lot like the movie, they're actually writing the book knowing it's going to be a script eventually, and then that's something completely different. But in general, if an author is writing a book because they want you to be reading it, in order for it to be a good movie, there's going to be some changes. They're going to have to cut some things out, or they're going to have to change it to make it work for film. So just keep that in mind, that they're 2 completely different things. So I'm looking at my time. I did go over, but there was a lot of stuff I threw in there that I want you to understand way beyond just matching the terms and say, yeah, here's the term, here's the definition. I want you to be thinking about how these terms actually work with a story. And the reason why I want you to really understand it frontwards, backwards, and things like that is the more you know these conventions and how they work, it's a formula. And if you know how they work with one another, you can, after the first couple paragraphs of a short story, pretty much predict how the rest of the story is going to play out. And it's there to create order within the world of a story. You have the protagonist, you have the antagonist, and I didn't even really go over that a whole lot. Maybe I'll just make that another video, 5 minutes, just to talk about the difference between the two. But that's why I really want you to understand this stuff, is you will be able to be that person at the movie that within the first 5 minutes of the movie you can say, I know exactly what happened, because you know the conventions. You know that there's going to be this thing in the beginning that seems kind of sort of random that's going to come back later in the climax. It was put there in the exposition and it comes back. Or how they introduce the conflict. If it's done and it's a tight plot, how the conflict is introduced, there's going to be some type of hint there on how the climax is going to be ultimately resolved. Because there's going to be some clue in the beginning of how the problem started out, and the only way to resolve it and grow from it is to go back and revisit how it actually started in the first place. So I threw a whole lot of stuff at you, but if you pause this and listen to it and really take your time and take down all the finer points of what I said and note my brilliance, it'll help you in the future. So next year, the following year, they'll ask like, well, how did you figure out that plot? How did you realize that this is... Ooh, I think that was the cat. You haven't seen my cat yet. One day she'll decide to show up and I can show you her. And then I'll know that you watch the videos, because I'll ask you, what does my cat look like? So anyway, yeah, all that information, pause, watch it along the way. Take about a week to do it, to watch this stuff and make sure you understand it, because I will bring in some of these points in the video into an assessment. I might say, with this one story, how did you know that this had to work out a certain way? And you would be able to say, because of the foreshadowing in the inciting incident. Woo! Right? So you'll start to sound really, really super smart, and as smart as any writer out there or a movie producer, director, because they know all these tools. It's not some secret club that we all know these things about. It's just definitions and how to apply them intelligently in future texts. So that is what I want from you to be able to get out of it. And, you know, that's the whole point of this flipped classroom thing, is you watch this video over a couple of days, and then I'll say, all right, now in class, instead of listening to me talk like this, in class, you'll get down to it and show me that you learned all this stuff with your fellow students, and you'll help each other out to figure this. And then when I say it's time for your summative assessment and you have to show it to me, you'll be able to do that. All right? So, yeah, this was like almost a half an hour. But it's worth it. I want you to learn all this stuff, and I might edit some of this out even and break it down, but that's where we're at this point. And one more video I'll make about protagonist versus antagonist, and we should be good for this whole short story novel terms unit. So you watch these videos, it's like 1 hour tops, but it would have taken like 2 weeks, I think, in class to make sure you got all this stuff. And you can just watch it on your own time, break it down, and you got it. All right, thanks a lot, and stay tuned for protagonist, antagonist.